Hey everybody, Evan Lazar, Alex Barth, live Patriots Beat podcast. On this Tuesday edition, Alex, we saw a lot of news trickle in out of the Alabama Pro Day today. A couple pictures circulated the interwebs of Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels taking in the action. We will get to some of the things about them standing next to Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch as well. This is one of those things, though, where a picture says 1,000 words, right? You have the Niners brass standing right next to the Patriots brass at Alabama's Pro Day, all taking in Mac Jones, who could go to anybody at this point. San Francisco at number 3 is totally in play. We can also discuss a little bit about Justin Fields later on in the show and his Pro Day today, and his 4.4 in the 40-yard dash was just extremely impressive. But we wanted to kick off the show with the Alabama Pro Day with Bill and Josh McDaniels being there as well. What were your initial reactions to seeing both of those guys in attendance at Alabama today?
I think it means, and I don't know, but maybe it means that you narrow it down to the Alabama offensive prospects. And yeah. I honestly think that the offensive prospects this year coming out of Alabama might be better overall than the defensive prospects. I think Surtain is the best overall player, but if we're going to talk about volume, you've got obviously Mac Jones, the receivers, Landon Dickinson. I love Alex Leatherwood. I think there's a ton of talent on the offensive side of the ball down in Tuscaloosa. So maybe that's why Josh McDaniels is there to get, a little closer look at some of those guys. Or maybe that's exactly what Bill Belichick wants us to think, and he's taking Dylan Moses at 46. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. But I think that was the biggest thing for me. When that picture circulated at first, not a lot of people, some people might have missed that Josh McDaniels was in the background of the photo.
I did not know. He's getting a little gray there on the sides. I didn't think it was him, because if you look at the side of his hair, I mean, he's never really been that gray. I figured it was somebody else. It wasn't until like Breer and those guys point out it was McDaniels that I realized.
Yeah, so when I saw the picture, it first circulated, everybody is putting Bill and John Lynch together, right? And saying, right. They talking Jimmy G, what are they talking about? I actually thought it was a much bigger deal that Josh McDaniels was there. Bill Belichick can pick up the phone and talk to John Lynch about Jimmy G any day of the week, right? He doesn't need to go to Alabama's Pro Day and bring Josh McDaniels with him to discuss a Jimmy Garoppolo trade. That's something that they can talk about at any point in time. The fact that Josh McDaniels went down there, and you mentioned all the offensive talent on Alabama, it goes just beyond Mac Jones, right? It's the receivers, right. It's Najee Harris, it's the offensive linemen. There's so many great prospects down there, and the fact that they wanted McDaniels to get eyes on all these guys when they have the inside track with Nick Saban. Bill Belichick's already in there himself. Bringing McDaniels along, I think, is a pretty big indicator that the Patriots, at least like somebody out of that Alabama group on the offensive side of the football, we can guess or take educated stabs at who exactly that is. And it certainly brings up the conversation about Mac Jones, but somebody in that group, whether it's Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle or Mac Jones or whoever, has caught the Patriots' eye. I think that is definitely true.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe, who knows, maybe it's Najee Harris. We saw him throw that touchdown pass. There's, this is a year, and we've talked about this a lot, that I just think that there's a lot of doubt about the guys who are on the board. You don't have a combine. You don't have a full slate of college football games. I think teams are going to stick with what they know, and I don't think you're going to see a lot of teams get adventurous. Bill Belichick obviously has the connection with Nick Saban. He knows that program inside and out, and I wouldn't be surprised in a year where everything's kind of unsure in the draft that maybe he leans a little heavier on that and takes an Alabama guy or two because he knows he can trust Saban's analysis. So, yeah, I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't take, and maybe it's, later on in the draft, but I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't take an Alabama guy this year.
I agree. And I think the smokescreen stuff is more for the 49ers than the Patriots. When you're sitting at 15 in the draft, you don't really need to worry about it. Excuse me. You don't need to really worry about it, I don't think, because look, 14 teams are, if you're going to stay there at 15, 14 teams are kind of going to decide who you pick, right? It's not really like it's up to you. Whereas at number 3, if you really, really like Mac Jones, you might not want people to know. Or if you really, really like Justin Fields, you might not want people to know because you don't want anybody to jump you to 2 to get your guy. So I think at 15, you can kind of lay back in the weeds a little bit more. 3, that's sort of where the draft starts. And that's the next direction I wanted to go in here. The Niners are clearly going to take a quarterback. There's no doubt about that. They've actually already said publicly that they traded up to take a quarterback. So we know that the Niners are taking quarterback at 3. It feels like right now, and maybe the Jets will end up surprising us all, but Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson seem like the first 2 picks in the draft. So the draft really feels like it starts at number 3 at this point. And there's a lot of conversation. Daniel Jeremiah went on a podcast on The Athletic and said that the majority of the league feels that number 3 pick is going to be Mac Jones. There's a lot of conversation about who the Niners are going to take, but would it surprise you if they took Mac Jones? Because I think going into this process, that would have been very shocking for everybody that Mac Jones is going to be the 3rd pick in the draft based off the skill sets that Trey Lance and Justin Fields bring to the table. More athletic guys, bigger guys in the pocket, stronger arms, just more natural talent than a guy like Mac Jones. But maybe Kyle Shanahan's able to see through a lot of that and figure out that sometimes playing the quarterback position isn't always about who has the biggest arm, right? It's sometimes there's other things that play here that Mac Jones might be a little bit better at. First of all, let's get the take on what we feel like Mac Jones at 3. But I also think that there's some things to be said about Mac Jones' pro day, both pro days, and just sort of this feeling that he's never going to be that impressive in shorts and a t-shirt, right? He doesn't have that body that really gets everybody's attention. He doesn't have the arm. He's not Zach Wilson throwing off his back foot after rolling out and hitting a 60-yard dime the other direction. He's not going to make those types of throws at a pro day. So I was actually pretty surprised, and I give him credit for going up there and throwing both days. But I was actually pretty surprised that he did, because if I was Mac Jones, I would just kind of be like, trust the tape. Right? The tape is great. Watch the tape. I don't need to throw, because it's sort of like a guy that doesn't run the 40 because the 40 is going to be bad. Right? The pro day wasn't going to be super impressive from Mac Jones.
Well, I would say at the same time, I think, you mentioned some of the shortcomings Mac Jones has. I think a lot of what the hype is around him is just his focus level, right? And how much he buys in and what a gamer he is and just what a football guy he is. And if you skip out on the pro day, you're like, I think he's trying to reinforce by throwing up both pro days. He kind of reinforces the fact that he's this, this scrappy underdog who wasn't even supposed to be a draft pick. He beat out the number 1 quarterback recruit in the country for the starting job just on, his hard work and all of that. And I think he's just kind of continuing to play into that, because I think that's what a lot of teams like in him, is that work ethic and that commitment to the game. So I think performing at the pro day, regardless of how he actually performed, in a way does a lot to boost his draft stock.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. I just think it's interesting because we talk about this all the time. Who looks the best in shorts and a t-shirt? Guys like Josh Allen, for example, or Trey Lance, or Zach Wilson the other day is making the throw of the pro day, according to everybody, that back foot throw. Those are the types of guys that always impress in these types of environments. Mac Jones is more of a gamer, right? He's more of a guy that impresses on tape than he does impress in a workout like this. A lot of the things that you mentioned, though, about Mac, the intangibles are really important. The fact that he is teaching Bill O'Brien the Alabama offense, I think, is really an interesting kind of twist. That Mike Lombardi is the first one to throw that out there. Basically, they put Bill O'Brien and Mac Jones in a room and had Mac Jones go through the entire Alabama playbook with Bill O'Brien to teach him the system. So that kind of tells you what's between the ears with Mac Jones. They basically feel like he has the playbook completely mastered and is almost an offensive coordinator in his own right for Alabama, which is really impressive. I think that that's something that's going to take that next step as well into the league, that he's going to be able to master a playbook like the 49ers have or like the Patriots have. Football IQ, ability to throw from the pocket, quick eyes, quick through his reads. Those are the types of things that I feel like sometimes get overlooked in these draft conversations because we're so caught up in the raw abilities. So as much as I think it would shock a lot of people that Mac Jones goes at 3 because of his physical stature, the fact that he doesn't have the biggest arm, he's not the most athletic out of this group, but all of those other intangible qualities and what's between the ears oftentimes I think get overlooked in the draft. And maybe a team like the 49ers are smart enough to realize that there's other things at play that make great quarterbacks great, and it's not always about those physical gifts.
Yeah, and I think we see this trend when a quarterback takes off, whether it was Brady, whether Rodgers, Mahomes, everybody looks for the next guy. After Tom Brady was drafted, there were teams left and right trying to find the next Tom Brady, and they ended up pretty much with a bunch of bums. Then Aaron Rodgers came out, and you had teams looking left and right for the next Aaron Rodgers. And for every Aaron Rodgers, you get 20 Jake Lockers. Then Patrick Mahomes broke out, and you have everybody looking left and right for the next Patrick Mahomes. And, between guys like Jordan Love and guys like that, I think you're going to see a decent amount of busts. So it always just kind of corrects back to the norm, I think. And at the end of the day, quarterback is a mental position. So if you can get the guy who knows what he's doing, especially if you're a team like San Francisco, and you already have a championship caliber roster and you just need that piece, then Mac Jones is the perfect fit. The only question is you're drafting Mac Jones, and we've talked about this a ton. You're drafting Mac Jones for his floor, not his ceiling. And that's because he's probably as NFL ready as any quarterback in this draft not named Trevor Lawrence. So that's where it gets interesting for the Patriots is if they were going to draft Trey Lance or Justin Fields, I totally understand holding on to Jimmy Garoppolo. I totally understand it because those guys aren't ready. Mac Jones is basically just Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, I don't know what Jimmy Garoppolo is teaching Mac Jones, right? I'm sure there's something
more durable Jimmy Garoppolo, right? The thing that he does well, I think he does throw the ball a little bit better down the field on deep balls, got a little bit better of a touch and accuracy down the field, but for the most part, their skill sets are very similar, which is why the thing is putting them together, why they're putting the Niners and Mac Jones together.
Right. I get that the Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes comparison, I do, but if you're really contingent on your rookie quarterback not playing for a year, why do you want Jimmy Garoppolo to be the bridge? Because your rookie quarterback's going to have to play at some point, unless you then go out and get a third quarterback. And didn't they just trade? They just traded one of their quarterbacks, didn't they? I don't remember if it was Beathard or Mullins. Yeah, didn't they trade one of those guys to Jacksonville?
They might have traded Beathard. Mullins is still on the team.
I saw they traded one of them, but yeah, so then so you're keeping Garoppolo, and then Nick Mullins is going to start games while the quarterback develops. Again, I just don't. Yeah, it was Beathard. They traded Beathard to Jacksonville.
Yeah,
I just don't get how Jimmy Garoppolo is your bridge because we don't want the rookie to play, because the rookie's going to play if Jimmy's your bridge because he's going to get hurt.
There's kind of presents the next conversation here. We mentioned the photo with Bill Belichick standing with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. The question really boils down to me, Jimmy Garoppolo is not going to be the 49ers bridge quarterback at $25 million against the cap next year, right? I mean, you don't trade all this draft capital, use a number 3 pick on a quarterback, and then pay his
on that quarterback specifically.
Right. And then pay his bridge $25 million for his rookie season. You just, that's not smart business. It also brings into question, if you traded all of this stuff, you traded 3 first-round picks essentially to move up to number 3. If you're San Francisco to draft Mac Jones, I mean, it makes total sense if you want to move up to draft Fields or Lance because their upside is all pro caliber player, right? Mac Jones's upside is definitely lower than those guys, and you traded this entire haul. I don't know. I just don't think that those dots connect. So the 49ers can say all that they want about Jimmy G's not going anywhere, but you're selling us on the fact that you are trading up all this to draft a guy at number 3 who might not be ready to play right away, and then paying his backup or his bridge, whatever you want to call it, $25 million over the next 2 years to be the bridge quarterback. It just doesn't add up. It's a lot of money and a lot of investment in the quarterback position on 2 guys, taking up tons of your draft capital and your cap space. It just doesn't add up to smart business to me.
And at the same time, where Garoppolo's not happy, we know that.
Right.
At what point does he ask out? And do you want to trade him before he demands a trade and tanks his value? Because I don't see why he stays. I don't see why he stays in San Francisco. Because one of 3 things is going to happen. And only one of 3, either, maybe he plays well, and then he can go out and restructure on the final year of his deal and get a ton of money and get traded, and San Francisco gets a huge return. That's one option. But the other 2, which are more likely, are he gets beat out for the job by a rookie, which he won't sniff $25 million a year again after that, or he gets hurt. And there goes the money again. So I don't know why he wants to stay there.
He doesn't want to stay there. I can say that. He's been disappointed in this process. And the Niners, again, they came out the other day. They had a joint press conference. They both said, okay, they're going to sit there and say that Jimmy G's our guy, at least for now. We're going to use him next year. He's going to be on the roster. He's our guy for 2021. Jimmy G's not believing it, just like we're not all believing it, right? And he has this feeling of this lame duck that he's eventually going to be replaced. He knows he's going to be replaced sooner rather than later. So I think all that stuff adds up to Jimmy G eventually wanting to get out of here, in terms of San Francisco, that is. And the biggest question for him, as I've said multiple times, is the contract. No one is going to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo under this current contract. Nobody would trade for Marcus Mariota under his contract. Nobody's going to trade for Jimmy G under that contract. So something's got to give contractually. Now, he can have this trade happen and then restructure his deal with the new team after the fact. But there are not a lot of teams that can fit a $25 million cap hit under the cap right now. So the Patriots are one of those teams that couldn't do it unless they work around some things with guys on their current roster, on their current payroll. So Jimmy G's best path forward to me is to make himself more desirable for other teams by lowering his cap number, by taking a pay cut or restructuring his contract to get that number down so that the Niners can actually move him, because the Niners are not going to cut him because they seem dead set on him being on the team next year. At least that's what they're saying publicly. But if they do want to move him, he's going to be very difficult to move at his current cap number. So Jimmy G's got to lower that number. Then maybe they can move him. Another pro day that was today was Justin Fields. And he did everything that we all kind of expected him to do. He ran a 4.44 in the 40-yard dash at his size, his weight. Pocket quarterback that can also run like that is a pretty rare commodity. So I think the question with Justin Fields, though, all these people showed up to Alabama today, right? Belichick.
Right.
Obviously, Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers brass, which is really the team that you want to look at very hard. What's going on with Justin Fields? Where does he fall in this draft order? And how impressed were you today by the fact that he performed pretty well at the pro days? His throwing session, he had some misses in there, but I don't look too much into any of those throwing sessions for any of these guys.
I mean, I think we know what he is. I don't think he changed opinions one way or the other. He's a supremely athletic quarterback who is coming along in terms of the technical element of the game. I think that's been the case. I still think he should be a top 5 quarterback in this, a top 5 pick in this draft. But yeah, I guess I wasn't necessarily swayed one way or the other. I think he more or less did what everybody expected him to do.
I agree. I wasn't swayed one way or the other with it either. I think a lot of these things get way overblown in general, but with Justin Fields, I think there is a conversation about not overthinking it, right? This is a guy that is a supreme athlete at the position, but also a very sound pocket passer at the position as well. There are concerns, and I wrote about him myself, about his processing speed, his ability to get through the progression and things like that. It's not always true. There are definitely elements on it. I would say it's an inconsistent trait of his, because sometimes he does it extremely well and he cancels out the one side of the field, gets to the backside of his progression and makes a throw. Sometimes that happens on his tape. Other times he's missing guys. He's not getting to number 2 or number 3 in the progression. He's holding the ball, staring down number 1 in his read. Those things happen too. So I wouldn't say that it's always one or the other with him, but there are some things and concerns about his processing speed and his ability to get through progressions at a good rate. But at the same time, those are all mental aspects of the game that are more than likely coachable and fixable. And depending on what you're asking him to run, you can definitely have the ability to work some of those things out. Ohio State runs an offense. It's a vertical passing system with a lot of option routes down the field, breaking at 12 yards down the field. So it's key for his receivers to make quick decisions. That's why sometimes he's holding onto the football, waiting for his receiver to actually make a break, and the receiver never breaks or is slowed out of his break, and it's hard for him to pull the trigger. That's where some of the hesitancy comes. I think the biggest thing with Justin Fields, not necessarily can he go 1, 2, 3, 4? But more so, can he cancel out one when one isn't an option and get quickly to 2? That's what I saw with him, more as a lack of process of elimination based off the coverage, not necessarily somebody that was consistently staring down a read or a one read quarterback, as we like to say. Today, no reads, no defense, no nothing like that. But I think that those are going to be the conversations that people are going to be having when they're evaluating Justin Fields is, can we put him in a system where he's speeds up his process, where he's quicker through these things, or is he always going to be the type of quarterback that kind of stares down waiting for that big play down the field?
And that's all going to come down to where he lands. Like, there's a lot of guys, Josh Rosen was like this, and obviously he didn't turn out great, but a lot of guys, you can project skills left and right, but it's all going to come down to the situation. Where do they end up? I guess Sam Darnold would be another example of this, where I thought Sam Darnold was supremely talented, but the second he got drafted by the Jets, you just knew that was all going out the window, and he was going to, not quite a bust, but he was going to go down as maybe a reach of a draft pick. And I think Justin Fields projects to be another one of these guys where if he goes to San Francisco, where it's a good coach, a good system, he's going to be given the time, the chances, the opportunity to put in the work he needs to put in to become a good NFL quarterback, then he's going to be fine. I know we think the Jets are taking Zach Wilson, but just, if he were to go to the Jets are the Jets. Goodbye, Justin Fields' NFL career. So I think he's one of these guys that the situation is going to dictate a lot in terms of the player he becomes. So we got to see where he ends up.
If I'm a player, I desperately want to, if I'm a quarterback in this draft, Trevor Lawrence already knows he's going to be a Jacksonville Jaguar. But if I'm one of the other quarterbacks in this draft, I desperately want Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch to call my name night, because those guys have job security. They don't need to throw the rookie quarterback into the fire right away to save their skins, right? They can wait and let that guy sit. They can go through the growing pains with a Trey Lance or Justin Fields. If I'm one of those guys, I'm definitely 100% wanting to go to San Francisco, because that's a big one there. I also wanted to just do this before we're going to get into some questions. I see some people in the chat wondering if we're going to get to some questions. We're going to get to some questions in a second. We're also going to talk about Stephon Gilmore as well. But for Justin Fields and Mac Jones, let's put Mac Jones on the board first. How high are you trading up, Alex, to get Mac Jones? Where is sort of the ceiling that you would be willing to offer a haul to get into the top 10 to get a player like that? Because I think you're going to have to do that. I don't think I don't think he's falling outside the top 10 at this point.
So this is a cop-out answer. I would trade up to 7, depending on what happens at 4. Right? If somebody gives up a haul to go up to 4 and get Lance, and it's I'm not giving up 3 first-round picks to get up to 7. Okay. If somebody gives up maybe 2 firsts and a second to get up to 4, and then maybe I can, just give up 15 and 46 and maybe a future second to get up to 7, then I'm having the conversation, but I'm not giving up a ton for Mac Jones, just because I think, as much as I like Mac Jones, and I do, there will be a chance to get a Mac Jones next year. So if the price is affordable at 7, which I don't think is impossible, I'd maybe consider that. But I'm not selling the farm to get up to 4 for Mac Jones.
Right. I think that's a fair assessment. I think the biggest thing is that Carolina, to me, is not going to be the team that ends up moving up for Mac Jones. And they're sort of the biggest threat, I would say, to the Patriots for that 4th or 5th quarterback, however you want to evaluate it. I don't think Mac Jones moves the needle enough for Carolina. They're looking for a guy that they can be the face of their franchise. They can build a new stadium around. They can build a big fan base back up like they had with Cam, right? They're looking for that sort of guy. That definitely fits Justin Fields a lot more, or Trey Lance a lot more, than somebody like a Mac Jones. I just don't think you draft Mac Jones and it invigorates your fan base. It excites your fan base a whole lot. So I would say that for Carolina, they're probably more in the conversation to trading up to 4 with Atlanta. There are some rumors, I would call them, that Atlanta might take a quarterback themselves. I know Peter King threw that out there as well, that they might be looking at a guy like Trey Lance to sit behind Matt Ryan for a year or 2 and then bring him along slowly. I don't know if you use the number 4 pick on a guy that's not going to play until year 3. That's usually something that teams do later in the first round or the second round. So Carolina wants that superstar. They want that big name quarterback, that Ohio State quarterback like a Justin Fields that's really going to move the needle for them in terms of the fan base and in terms of the excitement around the team. So for Mac, I think you could probably wait till around 9 with Denver and maybe be able to get him. The question is does John Elway fall in love with Mac Jones, and does he end up liking him more than Drew Lock? And are they willing to give up that pick for him? So I would say Mac Jones I would probably be more in the 7 to 9 range in terms of a trade up, which probably wouldn't take all that much. You probably trade number 15, maybe a third round pick this year, a third round pick next year, or something like that could probably get that deal done. I don't think you have to give up 3 first round picks to move from 15 to 9, like the Niners did to move from 12 to 3. So I think that is something that could be feasible with Justin Fields. Do you move up to 4 for Justin Fields, or are not into that?
Fields, no. So we're taking Lance out because I thought we were doing Mac and Lance.
No,
Lance is the only one I'm moving up to 4.
Justin Fields or Lance?
Fields, I'd move up to 4. Lance, I'd move up to 4. Fields, no. I've said it before. I don't trust Ohio State developing pro-ready quarterbacks. I think you can get a guy next year or the year after with Fields' tools who maybe just comes from a more pro-ready program.
Okay. I can understand that. I think Justin Fields in the Ohio State thing, this always happens, right? There's no good Alabama quarterbacks. There's no good Ohio State quarterbacks. At some point, somebody's going to work out, right? So someone's going to break that sort of mold. I would say with Justin Fields, though, it's more a concern about his fit and exactly what they're going to be doing this year in terms of the playbook. If they can adapt it around him and they can get the receivers around him to become a vertical offense, and those tight ends going up the seams and stuff like that over the intermediate part of the field between the numbers, that fits Justin Fields. He can do stuff like
right. But I would say you just put all these assets into building this team the way it is. Do you really want to invest a ton to give up to get a guy where then you're going to have to invest even more to continue to churn your roster? I just don't, to me, drafting Justin Fields, look, if he falls to 15, take him. The kid's talented. There's no doubt. But I think if you're trading up to get Justin Fields, that's 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Because now all of a sudden you got to remake the whole offense that you just pumped $100 million into, 2 weeks ago.
Right. Yeah. That's sort of my feeling on it too, is that Justin Fields, the foundation would have to change of the scheme, right? You have to do a different type of look at it. You'd have to be more vertical. You have to be more shotgun pistol types of sets. You're not going to run a ton of under center. You're not going to be this timing, precision-based passing game with a quarterback like Justin Fields. Mac Jones certainly fits that bill a little bit more, but his upside's a little bit smaller. I think that those are the conversations that you have to have is, do you trade up to number 4? Are you willing to give up what the Niners just gave up to move up from 12 to 3? You're probably going to have to give up a similar package to move up from 15 to 4. And is that something that you would really want to consider? I don't know if I want to consider that, to be honest with you, because a lot of these quarterbacks don't have a ton of tape. They all have bust qualities. There's all something that I think could turn them into busts. Justin Fields, it's processing speed. Mac Jones, it's physical tools and that ceiling kind of thing, right? Maybe not a bust, but just a player that doesn't live up to the draft expectation. That's my concern, is that the Niners just gave up a ton to do that. And I don't think any of these quarterbacks are perfect. And most of the time, none of them are. So at what point do you sort of have that conversation of, is this even worth it to go all the way up to 4 and trade 3 future first round picks for a guy?
And by the way, we do have a little bit of breaking news here.
Are you going to do the siren again?
No, it's not siren worthy. Okay. We knew it was happening. It's just now official. This was reported over the weekend. The NFL owners were expected to vote to add the 17th game. That, per Schefter, locked that in. 17 games, add the Cowboys to the schedule this year for the Patriots. And here we go. We're going to find out if there's such a thing as too much of a good thing, I think, between the extra playoff games and the wild card games in the 17th week. And it sounds like, too, somebody reported earlier, there's going to be one less preseason game now. So the season's still going to start at the same time, but instead of the 4th preseason game, it's going to be 2 weeks off between the preseason and regular season instead of the 1.
I like the 17th game, to be honest, because as a reporter, I love it, because we sit there at that 4th preseason game and watch a bunch of guys that aren't going to be on the team in a week, right? And it's no offense to those players, but that game is worthless. And maybe now season game
it wasn't always like that. It's just because they changed how the roster cutdowns work.
Right. So now that the roster cutdowns work this way, it's a meaningless game. It's really a procedural thing in that fourth game. It's to get guys, put tape out for those guys that they know are going to get cut. Maybe guys that they want to showcase for a trade or something like that. That's what that fourth preseason game was all about. Remember, Jacoby Brissett had that huge fourth preseason game, and that helped out his trade value a little bit.
Danny Etling, 78-yard bootleg legend. Let's not forget about that.
Exactly. You know, there are things like that happen, I guess, are sort of – I'm glad that the preseason is getting shortened. The 17th game I'm fine with as long as the players get compensated fairly for that 17th game. There's a lot out there that the players are going to get still a 1/16th game check instead of a 1/17th game check going forward. They should be paid for that 17th game fairly and equally as to all the other 16 games. As long as that happens, I'm all for this. I think that this was inevitable anyways, so I kind of had already wrapped my head around the fact that we're probably going to get to 18 at some point. But I
would think so, yeah.
They're going to have to collectively bargain that. The 17th game was built into this last CBA as a possibility, so you knew it was going to happen. So I guess that's a piece of why it's just not a surprise. It's something that's been in the works for a while now. It is interesting, though, that there's going to be 17 games now, so teams can't go 8-8. You know, there's no 500.
Right, no more 500 teams, which kind of sucks.
There's going to be uneven
500
road games, right? You know that.
Yeah. So how it's going to work is the extra game is basically you'll play a team from the other conference, the division you played 2 years before, who finished in the same spot. So that 17th game is always going to be AFC versus NFC, and they're just going to alternate which conference is home. So this year, the AFC all has an extra home game. Next year, the NFC will all have an extra home game. So when the Patriots play the Cowboys this year, that game will be at home. And then next year, so hang on, I got to do this in my head real quick. So that'll be what NFC division they play 2019. Do you remember?
19.
19 was it would be 20. So it would be last year. So it'll be the AFC West. So next year, right? So this upcoming season is the Cowboys. The year after that, whichever team finishes in the same spot in the NFC West that they do in the AFC East. So let's say they come in second in the division. Whoever finishes second in the NFC West, they will play that team there. So potentially, I don't think this is unrealistic, Evan. Jimmy Garoppolo going back to San Francisco 2022 season, that could certainly line up. You could have the Seahawks too, maybe Russell Wilson going back to Seattle in 2022 as a member of the Patriots. Maybe think about that. So, all right, now I'm being nuts. You want to take some questions?
Yeah, we can take some. I wanted to get Stephon Gilmore real fast, and then we're going to take questions. And I see a lot of people getting mad at us in the chat that we're not answering their questions. So we're going to get to your questions in a second, I promise. I wanted to talk about Stephon Gilmore. Albert Breer had the report that Gilmore is open to an extension with the Patriots. I think now, after all these offseason moves and all this shuffling and all these guys that they brought on board, it makes a whole lot more sense to keep Gilmore now than it maybe did a couple of months ago. Now that they have this roster ready and just need that quarterback, or have Cam Newton have a bounce back season or whatever the case may be, trading Gilmore makes a little bit less sense. I think the biggest hurdle, though, is still, where do they evaluate Gilmore? Where do they value him on the pay scale? Because I think we're all for keeping Stephon Gilmore if possible, right? I don't think anyone is looking to just ship him out of town anytime soon just to get him out of here. So the question is does he get Darius Slay money, which was around $17 million a year, or does he get Jalen Ramsey money, which is over $20 million a year? He's going to be over 30. He's got the knee issue. He's definitely closer to Slay in his career, right, than he is Jalen Ramsey in terms of age. So at what point, where's the line there, right? And what kind of deal does it look like? Because it doesn't sound like, at least right now, that Stephon Gilmore is going to take some team-friendly contract from the Patriots to stick around.
Right. Willing to sign an extension like that report, there's a caveat to that. It's assuming the money is right. I'm sure he'd sign anywhere if the money is right. So all that really does is rule out, back in October during the deadline, people were saying that he was just disenchanted with the organization and the stuff around him putting his house on the market, and he just wanted out. That we now know at least isn't true now. Maybe it was true at that point, maybe it's not. But he's open to staying in New England, but they still got to figure out the financial situation. I think this is going to run right up until the draft because I think they want to see if another team is going to bite on JC Jackson and what that contract's going to look like. And they have until April 23rd to figure that out. And, maybe if they recoup a second round pick and they know that they have 2 top 50 shots at a corner next year, they're fine letting Gilmore go or whatever the case may be. But I don't think we're going to get an answer on this for about a month. So
the advantage that they have is that there's not a ton of cap space across the league right now. So Stephon Gilmore is probably in his best interest to actually play out this last year of his deal with the Patriots and not sign a contract and then hit unrestricted free agency next offseason when the cap goes back up and they have the money available to offer him a $17 million deal. Right now, if I'm the Patriots, I'm lowballing him, right? And I have no disrespect to Stephon Gilmore, but I'm just saying, look, no team is going to hand you a $20 million contract right now. The money's too dried up. Your age, your injury history, that's not going to be out there for you until at least next offseason. So if I'm the Pats, I'm coming in at around $14.5, $15 million a year and just seeing if he'll take the immediate money up front and guarantees over betting on himself another year. That's another year of tread on the tires. It's another year of injuries, possibly. If that knee has anything structurally wrong with it, that could be a problem long-term for him in terms of a contract. That's what I'm going to look at if I'm the Patriots. 14.5, $15 million a year. That's, I think, a fair deal from the Patriots' perspective. We'll see if Stephon Gilmore is actually willing to take that.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to they're not paying both of them. They're not paying Gilmore and Jackson. And I just think they want to see what what Jackson's price is. I think it'll all kind of tie in. So I think there's a deal to be had there eventually. I just think that there's still like everything you said. I don't disagree with anything you said, but I think there's another piece to it in what happens with JC Jackson, and we're just not there yet.
Question is who do they prioritize more? Jackson, clearly the younger player, but also the inferior player.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying is Gilmore's the better player. How much, in terms of dollars, how much better is he? I think that's what they want to wait and see and find out. I think they have that dollar idea in mind. They just want to see if they're going to lose Jackson anyway, right? If they're going to pay Gilmore because Jackson's going to cost too much, if you can get another team to bite and give you a second round pick, you wait. So I think that's kind of what they're trying to wait and see what happens.
So we can usher in some of these questions.
Yeah, let's do this.
A question from our friend Julian. Does Gilmore have value in a trade-up scenario? Because this is a question that I've tried to think about myself is, okay, if you're a team that's trading back, either you have a win-now roster with a quarterback already and you feel like you don't need that hole so you can go back and get good value later on in the draft, or you're a team that has so many holes that you feel like you need to trade back to fill all of them because you can't just fix your team with one player, right?
Right.
I don't know what these teams in the top 10, other than Dallas is who has the 10th pick.
But you're not getting one of the quarterbacks there. So you need to look at the top 7.
Right. Really. The only way that you can make sense out of it with Dallas is if you trade Gilmore and to Dallas to move up, use that pick then to move up as an asset, right? In terms of flipping that pick to then move up. But the question really is, do any of these teams picking in the top 10 have any interest in Stephon Gilmore? Because my answer is no. I don't think that a team like Detroit or a team like the Denver Broncos, maybe a little bit more, but even still with that Fangio scheme, I don't see that as necessarily a great fit.
I think Atlanta could.
Okay.
If there's one, it's going to be Atlanta because all the reports have been there. They want to try to capitalize on Matt Ryan's window. They just reworked his deal. Stephon, look at that division. The quarterbacks and the well, I guess not the quarterbacks so much anymore now that Breeze is gone, but the wide receivers in that division, right? Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. You've got Michael Thomas, right, in New Orleans. You're going to need Robbie Anderson in Carolina. You really need a shutdown corner, something the Falcons do not have right now.
Yeah.
If they really want to make a run at this with Matt Ryan, maybe you take, and I said this before, I think they take Patrick Surtain at 4 because I think he's the best and most NFL-ready defender in this draft, and he plays a position of need for them. But if they don't even want to risk it that much and they think Surtain is a risk, then Gilmore makes a ton of sense, right? I guess if they know they want to add to their secondary with that 4th pick, who would you rather have? Stephon Gilmore or Patrick Surtain if you're trying to win now.
If you're trying to win right now, I guess Stephon Gilmore. But if I'm running Atlanta, I'd rather just take Patrick Surtain at that point.
Again, I'm not saying it's likely. I'm just saying I think there is a case to be made with Atlanta. If they really want to win right now, and it's kind of like
cap issues, I think is the biggest thing. Because remember, they're paying Matt Ryan. His contract right now is counting something like $35 million against.
So that's where the issue comes in.
Right.
Is would they be able to extend his contract, and you figure that out, but maybe they do something with void years or whatever. Maybe they just figure, look, Matt Ryan's objectively a top 10 QB in the NFL still. No? At the very least.
12. Yeah. I mean, he's
top 12.
A lot better than his record, right? You know, his tape is a lot better than the product that the Falcons end up actually putting out there every year.
So my point being, whoever you draft, there's no guarantee they're going to be Matt Ryan. You could go back into a quarterback carousel for 10 years. Right. Sure. Look at where the Patriots are right now. And maybe they're saying, look, we have a guy who's at least Super Bowl capable, right? Garoppolo got to a Super Bowl 2 years ago. Our guy's better than Garoppolo. Gilmore gets us closer to that. Let's just go for it. And, you know, the long-term projection is what it is. We want to win right now. And maybe that's a good point in the chat. Maybe there's some leverage to get J.C. Jackson there. I just don't know that J.C. Jackson gets you the 4th overall pick. You probably have to move a lot of other assets.
I think that maybe that's more in the conversation in terms of a trade up package. I think it's more likely that if they include JC Jackson in that kind of deal, that it sweetens the pot than Stephon Gilmore, because again, it's age, it's contract. It's tough to make both of those things work for a lot of those teams. And does Stephon Gilmore's window as a great player fit the window of the team that he's going to in terms of
the window's right now. It's this year and maybe next year.
Right. So if that's not you, if you're not a team that thinks that they're capable of winning right now, then Stephon Gilmore doesn't make sense. Maybe JC Jackson actually makes a little bit more sense for a team like Atlanta or a team like Detroit or a team like Denver that's looking to trade out of that pick for a team that wants a quarterback. So we talked about Mac Jones a lot. We did mention briefly some of the other Alabama guys, but out of the guys that Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels watched today at Alabama, who do you think is the most likely to end up a Patriot? Not the one you want the most, but the most likely to end up here.
Right. So it sucks because all my favorite guys for the Patriots right now in Alabama are actually going to be in next year's draft. And I mean, there's a ton of them. But in terms of just because like Mac Jones makes sense, but they're not going to pick high enough to get him. You know, same with Jalen Waddle. I don't think they have a shot at him. He would make sense. I'm going to go with Alex Leatherwood. Just, you know, a combination of need and want. Alex Leatherwood's a really good player. They need a tackle. He'll probably be there. They might be able to get him at 46 in the second round. So I'll go with Alex Leatherwood, but you can make a strong case for any of them. And again, next year is really the year. They could draft 3 Bama guys next year, but I'll hold off on that.
My fear is that the most likely guy is Najee Harris. I
didn't even think of that. Well, because I'm factoring in kind of their tendencies too.
Right. I am concerned that might be a pick that they could trade back in the first round, or maybe they are able to get because running back value across the league is going down. Maybe Najee Harris falls into the second round and they're able to have that conversation then. But in terms of who's the most likely outside of that, I really think that it is one of the offensive linemen. Maybe it's Leatherwood. Maybe it's Dwayne Brown. They loved Michael Onwenu, obviously, and getting another one of those big, huge guards might be something that they might be interested in. Some of the players on the defense side of the ball, too. You mentioned Dylan Moses. I think he's a guy that could actually fit what they do pretty well. So maybe someone like that. I know Josh McDaniels not necessarily there to watch the defensive guys, but it's probably not Smith and Waddle. I just don't see them using a premium pick in the top 15 in the draft on a wide receiver. Been wrong on wide receivers in them before, but that's just how I feel right now looking at it. So I'll say Dylan Moses or one of those offensive linemen might be the best fit here in New England, with Najee Harris as kind of a dark horse. Alex, we've been talking a little bit about tackles, offensive tackles, that is, with the 15th pick. Who's your favorite offensive tackle in this draft for the Patriots at 15?
Probably Tarasaw, right? I mean, he's going to be the best player on the board. Maybe if Slater falls, I just like, and I've been getting them so mixed up because I'm looking at both of them. Tarasaw can play left and right? Or is that Slater?
I think both of them could technically play left and right. Both of them are left tackles, though, in college.
Okay. Well, I just, both tackles the Patriots have right now, both starting tackles are on 1-year deals. So I think, you know, either way they go, Slater, Tarasaw, I think they'll be okay. I just think Slater's going to be off the board. If they can get Tarasaw at 15, they did very well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's going to be a really unpopular pick, but that's certainly one that can be a big possibility. I think that with Darrisaw, he plays the position exactly how they want it to be played. Somebody that has really good tackle feet, has the ability to mirror, but is a really strong player at the point of attack and can really move people off the ball. When I watch him play, though, you mentioned flipping back and forth, who's a right tackle, who's a left tackle. He kind of reminds me more of a Patriots right tackle prospect, not necessarily a left tackle prospect. Usually on the left side, they really want an athlete. Nate Solder, Isaiah Wynn, somebody that can really move out there. Darrisaw can move, certainly, but I don't know if he's a ballerina. He's not really super light on his feet necessarily in that way. So he would be more, no one's as big as Trent Brown, but he would certainly be more in that mold than somebody like a Nate Solder or an Isaiah Wynn. He's got great size, great power at the point of attack, flexibility, good feet for his size. Slater, I think, is going to go way higher. I think Slater's going to end up off the board probably in the top 10 somewhere to one of those teams that doesn't take Penny Sewell that wants to tackle. So between those two guys, I would definitely say Darrisaw is the most likely option. Slater is my number one tackle rated in the draft other than Sewell.
You have him. Oh, okay. So he's your number two then. That was just a long way of saying he's your number two tackle.
I guess so, because I always forget about Sewell because I know that he's going to be off the board.
No. It's all when I talk about like the top three quarterbacks, ignoring Lawrence. I know what you mean. But like it's again, I think Alex Leatherwood, if they go into the second round, would be a really good pick. Radins, the kid from North Dakota State, like there's Cosme in the comments. There's a lot of good tackles in this draft, and I don't know that, especially just the way they're set up, and they do have those two guys in place right now. If they want to take a guy who's maybe a year away, they're in really good shape to do that right now. And there's a ton of those guys in the draft. So there's not a lot of things they could do. There's not a lot of wrong decisions they can make in terms of tackle in this draft, which is good.
It's a very deep tackle draft. It's a very deep offensive line draft. This is one of the best offensive line drafts in quite some time, and the league desperately needs it. The league needs better offensive linemen. There's not a ton of depth at that position across the league, and this is one of those drafts where if you need any position on the offensive line, whether it's tackle, guard, or center, there's guys into the 5th, 6th round that can be NFL starters at those positions. So maybe the Patriots end up waiting on one of those guys and they have Carmen Bricillo or Dante Scarnecchia find Michael Onwenu or something like that, a diamond in the rough type player, and they end up going that way with tackle. Here's a good question, a good hypothetical. Caleb Farley and Micah Parsons. I think those are two players that I have concerns with for Patriots projection and aren't necessarily super high, especially Farley, super high on my, kind of wish list, right? Parsons is a little bit higher, but let's just take them separately and not necessarily next to each other. Do you like Farley for New England? Because he's a guy that I'm a little bit skeptical about.
So I really did until the other day, right? Back injuries just naturally scare you.
Yeah.
But you take that out of it. Yeah, if they could get him at 15, that's a huge win. They need a corner, really, really smart football player. I've talked about it on this show before. They do well with the guys who've changed positions. He's a former quarterback. Yeah, I would love, and I'll answer the question straight up. I'd take Farley. I think even with the back injury, they both have their inherent risks. I would take Farley. If they can get Farley at 15, even with the back injury, I still think they have to heavily consider making that pick.
Yeah, I don't know. The things that scare me about Farley are obviously the injuries, and he's a very raw technician out there. He's a guy that I think is very explosive, very athletic, has all the traits that you would like to see, but not exactly somebody that's a technician. Patrick Surtain, J.C. Horn certainly are guys that look like they know how to play corner a lot better than Farley does on tape. Micah Parsons, a superior athlete, right? I mean, he just destroyed his pro day, although all those Penn State numbers were completely out of whack. I think we do have to have the conversation of how much the off-field stuff weighs into the Patriots' evaluations of Micah Parsons. It's not just the hazing thing. He's had some other incidents in the past. He's just somebody that seems to get into trouble, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing and that should knock him out of the draft or anything like that. But if you're taking a guy at 15, I don't know. I think that's a conversation you have to have about that player is, why does this keep happening to Micah Parsons? Why does he have these off-field red flags, and how important are they? When you're drafting somebody in the 5th or 6th round, maybe you can overlook some of this stuff. But in terms of 15, I think you have to have the conversation with Micah Parsons as well. Davis Mills, wrong one. There we go. Your guy, I should say
your guy.
Your guy to hate on me for.
It's not that I hate Davis Mills. It's not that I hate Kellen Mond. It's not that I hate Jamie Newman. It's just, what do any of those guys add? I don't know what they give you that you don't already have. And again, I just think they'd be, if you're going to use a second round pick on Davis Mills, you're better off flipping that second round pick for a second or maybe
I wouldn't next year in the second round. No way. Yeah.
You're better off if you're not going to get one of the top 5 quarterbacks, and you're not going to. If you're not going to get one of the top 5 quarterbacks, you're better off pushing at, like, what should they do with 15 really? Push it into next year, because you're seeing what it takes to move up. If you can maneuver the draft where you have 2 firsts and 2 seconds next year, in a year where it's going to be easier to evaluate quarterback talent, you're going to be in a position to move up into the top 3 and get your guy. Using a second round pick on Davis Mills is just doubling down on Jarrett Stidham. That doesn't help you. That doesn't make you any better.
Not in the second round. So I think the biggest thing with Davis Mills, in terms of why I'm saying adamantly not in the second round, I believe the number is 11. He's made 11 collegiate starts. And a lot of that had to do with KJ Costello at Stanford, and it's just somebody, 11 career starts, somebody that just didn't have a ton of opportunity early on in his career at Stanford to start games. But he's somebody that is the prototypical raw tools-based prospect at the quarterback position, where 1 second he's throwing a 60-yard bomb on a dime, or he's throwing with the anticipation between the numbers, is rocketing a pass up the seam, and the second after that he throws a boneheaded interception. His best tape in college out of those 11 starts was against UCLA, and he threw 2 picks in the game, right? Because the volatility of his play is just so up and down. So yeah,
go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead, because I'm going to go off in a rant.
Yeah, so I put out a thread on Davis Mills, and there are plays that I can talk myself into, right? Like, I can see okay, he has anticipated.
But that's Division I quarterbacks. They're there for a reason.
Right, exactly. And I can say, okay, this guy can rip it up the seam. He can do all these things, right? But then there are plays on that tape against UCLA where he throws an interception, where he just throws the ball right to the flat defender, like just throws the ball right to him. Like he was the receiver on the intended target on the play. And you're kind of sitting there scratching your head like, well, what's going on here? Why do you like Davis Mills? Because I actually think that he's bigger, faster, stronger than a guy like Jarrett Stidham. So I think that he actually has more upside than somebody like Jarrett Stidham. But at the same time, I'm concerned about the fact that the lack of tape, the only 11 starts, the inexperience, and the volatility of his play is certainly something that is head scratching for sure.
So here's what I'll say about this, about David Mills and the whole thing. I'm not saying quarterbacks picked beyond the first round have to be like are all going to be bad. But it takes a lot more work to develop those guys, and it takes a lot of luck. If you are going to, like, a second round draft pick is a premium draft pick. Anything in the top 200, you can get a guy who's going to conceivably be an NFL contributor, maybe not major, but is going to be somewhat of an NFL contributor down the road. Quarterback's different because only one guy plays. Davis Mills, Kellen Mond, Shane Buechele, Felipe Franks, whoever you want to talk about. These guys are going to take a considerable amount of work, and none of them are one-off prospects. They are all, you can go out and get the same guy next year. And people are telling me in the chat that the 2022 quarterback class is no good. It always looks that. I'll just tell you guys this. It always looks that way the year before.
Well, because you don't have Zach Wilson yet, right? We didn't know that Zach Wilson. We didn't know that Mac Jones. We didn't know these guys were going to be as good as they are.
I'll go back. Joe Burrow, a year before he went first overall, was first overall drafted. Right.
Even Lamar Jackson was a player that everybody knew was a great athlete, but still had a lot of concerns about his ability to throw the ball.
There's been one quarterback really in the last 5 years who's lost draft stock, and that's Jake Browning.
Yeah.
Outside of him, even Justin Herbert had like an
lost draft stock as well.
Who?
Stidham
did too. You're right.
Yeah.
But, so. You don't know who's going to emerge next year. There's a lot of guys that are you have Sam Howell, you have Kadon Slovis, right? Phil Dracovic might not come out next year. I always say his name. He might not come out. I think he's that guy that has the monster year and jumps into the first round. But Michael Penix, depending on how his knee looks, out of Indiana.
from my guy from Cincinnati.
Who is that? Yeah, Desmond. There's players are going to it's not guaranteed. I guess maybe nobody does. And
I think Desmond Ryder has you mentioned Djokovic. I agree with that one too. But I think Desmond Ryder has a really good chance to end up being a top 10 pick. A guy that everybody falls in love with.
Right. I don't know that there's going to be 5 quarterbacks in the top 7 next year. I don't know that that's going to happen because that's unprecedented. But that's even the more. I'll tell you, there's going to be 3 top 10 quarterbacks next year at least. There should be because there is every year. Even more reason that you should push assets into next year so you are in the best position to move up in the draft and go up and get your guy. So I am at this point. I said this when they didn't take a quarterback in 2018 at the end of the first round, and there were all these intriguing second round options on the board. I said, nope, we're on to Drew Lock. I'm going to do it again. We're on to 2022 now. In my mind, we're on to 2022 when it comes to the quarterbacks.
Oh boy. All right. Here's another name that I feel like we're not talking about at all, and that's Kyle Trask from Florida. He's sort of fallen off the path because of all these other quarterbacks that have moved up the board in the meantime.
Right.
And even a guy like Kellen Mond at this point, in a lot of people's eyes, including my own, has jumped Kyle Trask in the pecking order. Do you feel like Kyle Trask is getting sort of under talked about, or where do you fall on the Kyle Trask bandwagon right now, I guess?
I do. I think he's underrated. He's so it's kind of interesting. I just went on that whole rant about how guys are either ready or they aren't. Kyle Trask is a rare example where he's sort of in between. A lot of it's going to depend on where he goes, what system he gets put in. I like Kyle Trask. I just don't think, right? I talked about before, I wouldn't draft Justin Fields because you have to change the whole offense. I like Kyle Trask in theory, but I just don't know that he's going to operate the offense that the Patriots have set up right now. So he'll be there on the board at 15. I don't think he's on the board at 46. I just think he's too in between. That's a tough one for me. I look at him and I'm thinking about Pittsburgh, right? Who's sitting there. They got a year or 2 left to bend. They're in the mid-20s.
Mason Rudolph 2.0, so that makes
and I liked Mason Rudolph. I think he's a little better than Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph, you don't?
I don't know. I think
I really like Mason Rudolph.
The problem with Kyle Trask is that, so apparently there was an injury with Kyle Trask that might have led to some of the reasons why his ball is coming out with so little steam. This is just not a guy that the ball pops out of his hand, right? When you watch him throw it, it just doesn't zip out. And maybe there was something to do with an injury there. I don't know. I think what I worry about with Kyle Trask, he reminds me so much of Nick Foles as a quarterback, where everything is just this soft touch throw. Right. Everything is right. This little pillowy feather that he's throwing out there. And sometimes when you're throwing to the short and intermediate areas of the field, and touch and timing are the 2 most important things, and obviously accuracy, that you can get away with that. But in the NFL, those windows close so quickly compared to college that you have these hesitations. The other hesitation, and I do think he deserves some credit for picking out matchups and understanding where Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney were on the field at times and being able to get to those guys. But when you're dealing especially with a guy like Kyle Pitts and Toney too after the catch, adding so many yards after the catch, but with Pitts, you can throw the ball anywhere. Right? You can throw it back shoulder. You can throw it over his head. You can throw it in the dirt. You can throw it anywhere, and he's going to catch the ball. So at some point, we talk about Mac Jones and his playmakers making him look better. I think that Kyle Trask's playmakers made him look a lot better last year than he actually is. So I have concerns about arm talent. I have concerns about velocity. Is he going to be able to get the ball there? Especially when the situation goes awry and he's throwing from a muddy pocket or throwing off his back foot. Is he going to be able to have the drive on the ball to get it there? And I don't know if I saw that with Kyle Trask as much as I saw with some of the other guys in this draft. Davis Mills, quite frankly, has a better arm than Kyle Trask does. I think Trask's a better quarterback, a better prospect overall, but he has a better arm than Kyle Trask. So that's a big thing for me.
And again, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but right, people are knocking Mac Jones for not being mobile. Well, he's less mobile than the guys at the top of the draft, but he's still mobile. Trask is a statue. I heard somebody say, and I think this is true, if it were 2006, Kyle Trask is the first pick in this draft. And, there might be something, he can be an NFL quarterback. He's just, you're going to have to run what is now kind of an antiquated offense.
So the last quarterback that we have, and of course I've missed the question because my thing jumped up here, but the last question that I saw on a quarterback, we're doing quarterbacks and might as well get to it, was on Sam Darnold. And he's obviously going to be available. The Jets are going to put him on the block. Can we just throw some water on the fact that he's not going to be on the Patriots anytime soon? Not that they necessarily want him to be on the Patriots, but just in terms of the optics of it, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's tough. Because if he comes here, he balls out. The Jets can never live that down. Like maybe I think Bill likes him, and maybe it's a down the road thing. He has 1 year left on his contract, right?
Right. So maybe they could get him in.
So maybe he goes somewhere on the last year of that deal, and he ends up a free agent, and the Patriots still don't have their quarterback situation figured out. Like I wouldn't be against it down the road. It's not the worst idea I've ever heard, but I just don't. The Jets aren't going to let him come to New England. I just don't think that's happening. So I like the idea. I like the player. I think that bad coaching in New York held him back, but it's unfortunate. It's the division thing. It's just not going to happen. So.
That's, I think, a big thing too. And my concern with Sam Darnold is if the Jets are willing to actually trade Sam Darnold to the Patriots, what do the Jets know about Sam Darnold? Right. If they're going to trade him in the division, they obviously don't think he's any good. So they believe, the Jets do, that it's not going to come back and bite them. So obviously they think something about it, right? They think that he's a bad quarterback. They think that he's got an injury that nobody knows about. Something like that is going on if they're willing to trade him within the division. Because if they're not, if they're going to trade him elsewhere, if they're going to move him to San Francisco, or if they're going to move him completely out of the division or out of the conference even, then that makes more sense that they think, okay, he's got some skill, he's got some talent, but we just like Zach Wilson better, and we're just going to go that route. So I don't really see Sam Darnold coming here for so many different reasons. That's the biggest one, is obviously an intra-division trade for a potential franchise quarterback. The Bills and the Patriots didn't make the Drew Bledsoe trade, but that was at a much different stage of Drew Bledsoe's career, right? We're talking about the tail end of his career, not where he's still.
Well, he had let's calm down. He had a really good year the next year in Buffalo. It would be more like,
I knew that would get you.
The perfect landing spot for Matthew Stafford was the Bears. That was the perfect landing spot for him. But it wasn't going to happen because it was the Bledsoe. That was just Belichick. Like that had never happened before. That will never happen again. That was a weird thing. I wouldn't compare that to anything. I think it's more like the reason Stafford didn't end up on the Bears. Somebody asked who we like for UDFAs. Can we do that question?
I don't know if I'm even prepared to do that question yet.
I've got a couple for you.
That's going real deep. Can we ask this wide receiver question first, and then you can give your UDFA rant? Okay. So a lot of talk about wide receivers. The Patriots still need a wide receiver. I don't necessarily think they're as desperate for a wide receiver help as other people do, but what's the earliest that you could see the Patriots taking a wide out?
Unless somebody really falls around 96, I think it's day 3. I think because, again, when we have this conversation, and I know that, it's hard to conceptualize it like this, but just bear with me.
Yeah.
You have to look at it as pass catchers. It's not wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs. It's pass catchers. The Patriots just invested very heavily in pass catchers, right? They're going to be in a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers. Aguilar is going to be one of those receivers. You still have Jacoby Myers. You still have Bourne. You still have Harry. There's not going to be a ton of reps for a rookie wide receiver on this team.
I don't know why everybody thinks that the wide receiver is huge. Right. I don't get it.
We talked about this during the mock draft, right? The most realistic option, I think, for the Patriots to take a receiver is you go and you get somebody on day 3 who pushes N'Keal Harry and makes N'Keal Harry expendable, and then maybe you trade him at the end of camp. So I'm talking about guys who we took Nico Collins, right, in our mock draft. Right. A guy like Nico Collins. I really like Jonathan Adams would be another guy like that. But, and then the other option, if they want to go the other way with the smaller, quicker wide receiver, again, you don't necessarily need to take Kadarius Toney on day 1 when you can get a guy like Jalen Darden on day 3. There's not a ton of incentive for them right now to use a high pick on a wide receiver. They don't need it. They have so many pass catchers. They don't need to use a high pick on a pass catcher. It's the same for tight ends. People are still asking about a tight end in the 2nd round. Why? Where is that guy? If you're using a top 100, top 150 pick on a player, there's going to be an expectation that he fills some role on the roster as a rookie. If they where is this rookie receiver playing? Is he playing over Nelson Aguilar? No. Is he playing over Myers? Maybe, but probably not.
That's what I don't understand is you just paid all this money to Nelson Aguilar, Hunter Henry, and Jonnu Smith. Clearly, the Patriots feel like the offense is running through those three guys. Whether you agree with that or not, that's where they're going with this offense, right? Especially the two tight ends in the running game. So they're going to be a run-heavy offense still. They're going to be a tight end-heavy offense, and people want to take a wide receiver at 15 that's going to see 60 targets next year. It just doesn't make any sense, right? The value there isn't there. And on top of all of that, this is another one of those wide receiver classes where there's probably like 20 guys that could go in the first three rounds. This is a really deep wide receiver class. So that's something that I think that we have to have a conversation about is the depth of the class. You mentioned guys like Darden. I think a guy like Anthony Schwartz or Tutu Atwell or Nico Collins or Seth Williams or Cornell Powell. These are all guys that you can have in the third, fourth, fifth round of the draft that you don't need to take at 15. So I don't know.
Hang on. You want me to put this in perspective? Because somebody in the chat said I have the worst takes. And you know what?
There's a couple people in the chat that are getting on our case today.
Well, I'll say, and tell me if you disagree. And this is not me saying this is what I would do, but this is a prediction. There's a real chance they take a running back before they take a receiver in this draft.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I know it's not going to be popular, but again.
Get ready for that government.
The targets aren't there. And there's the opportunity is not there. The need, I don't even think is necessarily there the way they're going to run their offense. So, all right. I think that's a really kind of puts a bow on everything that we wanted to discuss on the offense side of the ball.
Oh, wait. Hang on. This is a good last question here. Because we did Alabama, but they have another feeder school, Michigan. Who's the Michigan guy you like this year? Because I know you have an answer for this.
Okay. Well, Jalen Mayfield, the tackle from Michigan is awesome. I mean, that's definitely a good one. I think, though, if I really had to guess, it'd be Kwity Paye. I just think that he's the type of edge that they really like. And that's certainly somebody that he can play inside, can play outside, a little bit like a Trey Flowers, right? Who's quicker than he is necessarily anything else. He doesn't have the best get off, but he certainly has the quickness inside to be able to move around guys. If they're going to go defense early, then I definitely think that Kwity Paye is in the conversation. And that's the guy I would circle from Michigan if I had to circle anybody.
I mean, do you think he's still there though? I feel like that's a tough one. Like, does he get to 15 in your mind?
I think he might, because you're going to have 5 quarterbacks. You're going to have Penny Sewell. There's certainly going to be guys that I think are going to go ahead of them. The 3 wide receivers, Kyle Pitts. I mean, I just named 10 guys, right? So Patrick Surtain. I think he might be there.
All right, fair enough. I'll go with I like Cameron McGrone, because not only have they picked a lot of Michigan players, they picked a lot of Michigan linebackers. I still think there's a need for a linebacker, and that's a later pick too. You need a guy who you can kind of develop. So maybe McGrone. Somebody did bring up, I didn't even think of this, Ben Mason. That's a really good name, actually. Yeah, Ben Mason is definitely a good name for Michigan. So again, some of these schools, Michigan, Alabama, Georgia, that Bill Belichick constantly goes back to, they all have really strong classes this year. And again, it's a year where there's not as much information available. Talked about this earlier in the show. Teams are going to go back to where they're comfortable, what they know. I do think we see Bill kind of lean on some of his feeder skills this year. I don't know what Rutgers class looks like, although it's been a while since he took a guy from Rutgers. But those three schools, Michigan, Georgia, Alabama, good classes, and they're schools Bill likes to take guys from. Hang on, let me pull up Rutgers' big board here real quick. Yeah, Rutgers is one player projected, and he's projected to be UDFA. Brendan White.
He's haters for us here for a second, and we can.
Are you pulling up?
They're pulling up some of the haters. The two people doing a podcast.
I don't want to get into it with the chat. I was just messing around. I don't want to.
2 people that are doing a podcast are rambling. Breaking news.
I ramble a little bit sometimes, but
that's kind of how podcasts go. We talk about things for an hour and we have conversations about possibilities, aka rambling. Apparently, there were also a couple of other.
Hey, let's not. We're just trying to have fun here. We don't need to.
I know we're just trying to have fun. You want to come sit in our chair and see if you're better at it, go start your own podcast and you can ramble about your own stuff. Do whatever.
Don't say that, because now they're going to do it, though.
Yeah, I don't care. Keep coming back. I just think it's hilarious those are the types of things that we like to talk about. You wanted to do a Celtics minute. Do you want to do a Celtics?
Yes, we do need to do, because you kind of went off on the Celtics on Twitter on the trade deadline. It's our first show since. I know you got some heat for it, so I do need a Celtics minute from you.
Well, I got some heat from the green teamers, I guess they're called. Is that what we're calling them? The green teamers out there want to tell me how great the Celtics are and all these things. I just want to mention this. I feel like the Celtics throughout my lifetime, other than the KG era, have been this little engine that could, right? We're all just getting so excited about, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and this great tandem that we're going to have for 20 years. Look, I think both of those guys are really good players, but it's just frustrating to me that we continuously overrate everybody on the Celtics, and we don't want to make that big trade for a James Harden, and you don't want to make that big trade for Kawhi Leonard a couple of years ago when you didn't want to trade Jaylen for him. You didn't want to trade Jaylen for James Harden. You didn't want to trade Jaylen for Anthony Davis a few years ago before that. At what point in time do we have to say, okay, we don't want to just be a good team, but we want to be a great team. We want to be a title contending team.
So what did you think of the the deadline moves, not the macro picture of it and what it means for the franchise? But Evan Fournier for 2 seconds, it's not a bad return. Granted, he didn't exactly wow in his debut, but so that wasn't. I mean, look, I don't think they did enough either. But
that's what I'm saying is that I get told by all these people that Evan Fournier was this great move. And I'm not saying that we're basing it off of one game, that he stinks and all this kind of stuff. Evan Fournier does not get you over the hump, right? He doesn't get you past the Sixers. He doesn't get you past the Lakers in the finals. He doesn't get you over all these things. And I just feel like for year after year after year, they keep on making the Evan Fournier trade. They keep on making the Luke Kmet trade.
And Fournier, and again, this isn't a good thing or a bad thing, but Fournier's done the worst that is the biggest move they've done. Somebody brought up a good point. Like, they've been young for 4 years. I know they're young in terms of age, but they have a ton of experience, and that's kind of where it gets frustrating. So.
It gets frustrating to see the team kind of plateauing. That's what it is, right? They've plateaued. They're the same. They're this team right now. They're not, and they could be up at this level, but for whatever reason, whether it's a Brad Stevens issue or it's a roster construction issue, I don't know. I'm not an expert on basketball, so I'm not sure, but that's the problem that I have with the Celtics, is that we just can't seem to get them to be, they're always good, right? They're always in the playoffs. They're always in the mix, but they're never this great team. And I want to see great again. I miss great.
So Wilson, I just go sign DeMarcus Cousins, because I've just always been a fan. At this point, I just want to have, give me all the Luke Cornett. Give me a ton of Luke Cornett. Give me a ton of DeMarcus Cousins. Let's just have fun with it at this point and then see what happens next year. All right. There's Celtics Minute.
There's our Celtics Minute. We wrapped it up on that one. Ironically, we wrapped up Patriots Press Pass on the Celtics Minute. But Alex and I will be back on Thursday. We're doing another mock draft on Thursday, correct? I believe.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I'm down.
There's been a lot of differences, right? The trade up to 3 from San Francisco. So it's the last time we did the mock draft last Thursday. So we're going to do another mock draft on Thursday, new updated one, and then we're going to kind of go through some scenarios. I think we kind of tabled the trade up for a quarterback mock draft because we did that last time. So maybe this one will be the stay at 15 mock draft, and we'll go through some of the scenarios that they might be playing in their heads at 15. I think that's going to be a really good conversation. So come back on Thursday, same time, later on the day, actually, 7:30. Same place in terms of the live stream, and we'll do another mock draft, and then we'll be back next Tuesday with Mark Schofield is going to come on the pod with us next Tuesday to talk quarterbacks. So that's going to be really awesome. So Thursday mock draft, Tuesday Schofield. Until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching and listening and chatting along with us, guys. We really appreciate it.